Welcome to the Simple Sophisticate podcast, where intelligent living is paired with signature style. I'm your host, Shannon Ables, and whether you're listening on your commute, exercising, working in the garden, or sitting down with a hot cup of tea or a café au lait, thank you for tuning in. Let's get started. Welcome to the 46th episode of the Simple Sophisticate. I'm so happy you can join me today. We are starting a new era in the Simple Sophisticate. We're starting a new era in the blog, The Simply Luxurious Life. We're starting a new era in my life. As many of you guys know, I have officially relocated to Bend, Oregon. I am currently sitting in my house in Bend, Oregon. I still can't quite believe it. It has been less than a week, and I already feel at home in so many ways. And in a couple of weeks, I am going to dive right into how to move simply luxuriously, to make it seamless, to make it less stress, and to make it oh so enjoyable. But today, that post isn't ready yet. I have a lot of different things I'm thinking about, believe me, but I am still fine-tuning it. But today, I want to do something a little bit differently, maybe something a little bit harkening back to my roots when I began blogging. I want to just talk without a list. We're definitely going to have a purpose. Today, we're talking about the importance of cultivating a sanctuary, and it may not be what you think, so be sure to stay tuned. But I'm not going to go down a long laundry list. I will get back to those. Don't worry. I love them. I can't get rid of them. I absolutely adore them, so don't worry. But today, an idea popped into my mind a few days ago, and I wanted to share with you today this idea of how we really can tap into our full potential. We'll get into that in a moment. But before we do, I want to kind of give you an idea of what this week's Petit Plaisir is all about. It is something I am so excited to finally be talking about. It is something that will hopefully brighten your weekend and give you some verve and some information, and I think you're really going to enjoy it. So I'll talk a little bit more about that at the end of today's episode. So be sure to stay tuned. But back to this idea of the importance of cultivating a sanctuary, I want to begin with a quote by Christopher Forrest McDowell. He states, "Sanctuary, on a personal level, is where we perform the job of taking care of our soul." Over the course of these first handful of days in Bend, I have hit the ground running, exploring walking trails with my dogs, shops, bakeries, and even high mountain lakes to paddleboard on. And so, as I mentioned just a second ago, on Saturday, I had a moment, an aha moment. I found myself paddleboarding on Hosmer Lake. This particular lake is limited to non-motorized watercraft only. The only sounds that you will hear are the occasional fish jumping to catch a fly, the ducks and their ducklings from time to time changing directions to avoid a wayward kayaker, and those paddles grabbing the water to propel the curious navigators forward. With innumerable lily pads, bulrush wands, and other lush green water vegetation, much of the time that you are on the water, whether in your kayak, your canoe, or your paddleboard, you are following a path of water that's weaving itself along these naturally made water trails. Even though you're on a lake, it's like you're on this little trail. It's surreal and magnificent, and it's just gorgeous. This water also is crisp and so clear that the fish you can see right underneath you the entire time, not just near the shore, the entire time. And since the anglers can only fly fish, the fish have the upper hand for the most part. You'll have Atlantic salmon, rainbow and brook trout, and it's just, they're bustling about, and you're there on your paddleboard in this instance, just kind of, don't lose your balance and fall in, but no one usually does. And it's just magnificent what Mother Nature can do when it's undisturbed for the most part. I actually happened to meet a Forest Service ranger when I first got there, just accidentally pulled up, started talking to him as I do and asking all sorts of questions. And he was more than happy to give me the rundown of the 2 bald eagles that lived on the lake's few islands, where their nest was located, and tell me a little bit about the 2 hatchlings that were there growing up on the lake. He was also giving me a heads up to keep an eye out for the otters, because there's a few of them and very rarely do people see them. But if you do, you should feel fortunate. So I was eyes peeled looking for them. Didn't find any on this particular trip, but I'll go back. Who knows? Maybe I will next time see them. I'm sharing this experience, if you're wondering why, I'm sharing this experience because as I was paddling along for well over an hour, it became undeniably clear that when anything, be it Mother Nature or us, human beings, are given the space and freedom to do what comes naturally without being disturbed, scarred, or oppressed, magnificent outcomes materialize. In previous blog posts and episodes here on the Simple Sophisticate, I have talked about this idea of cultivating a sanctuary with reference to our homes. But today I'd like to view the necessity of a sanctuary in a larger context. Yes, our homes, without question, should be absolutely one of those sanctuaries in our lives that we can come home to and become rested and refreshed and rejuvenated before we go out the next day. But as the quote I just shared with you reminds us, any sanctuary is such because it allows us to, quote, perform the duty of taking care of our soul. Taking care of our soul. Let's look at that real quickly. First of all, what is the definition of a soul? Oprah Winfrey always ends her weekly Super Soul Sunday on her channel OWN with a handful of questions for her guest. And one of them is, what is the soul? Now, based on the myriad of responses by her guests, it's clear that there are just as many definitions as there are of the people she invites on her show. And I'll share a link on today's show notes of a handful of the responses in a quick little video clip. What keeps being repeated in one form or another is this idea of the soul being our true and most authentic self, that which is within us that cannot be taken away, die, or even change that significantly, no matter what we do. We may not tap into it, we may ignore it, but it's still going to be there. So if we look at this definition of soul through this lens, the necessity of taking care of our soul is profoundly crucial to reaching our full potential. I want to say that again. The necessity of taking care of our soul is profoundly crucial to reaching our full potential. And since we need to tend to our soul regularly, a sanctuary must be more than just our homes. In fact, as I mentioned 2 weeks ago on a previous episode, number 44, the importance of a sanctuary or intangible containers is crucial for HSPs or highly sensitive people. But whether we are an HSP or not, we will all need to have sanctuaries throughout our everyday routines where we can be left alone, unbothered, to discover that which is waiting to be realized within each of us. Some of us enjoy more alone time than others, but solitude is actually beneficial for us all, as I wrote about in a post a couple of years ago, and I'll share a link to that on today's show notes, podcast 46, the importance of solitude. Part of the reason we each need to be comfortable being in our own company is that we need to be able to understand what the crutches are in our lives that we initially were unconsciously aware of and ignorant to the effect that they are having in our lives, good or bad. So for example, television and advertisements and talking heads that fill the background even when we think we're not listening, or reliance on anyone who takes care of basic needs such as food, cleaning, laundry, bills, etc., or social and government and community constructs and what they provide, such as roads, mail, education, etc. Once we recognize and begin to either appreciate, thereby not taking for granted, or edit out crutches that are unhelpful in our growth as a person, we can then begin to live more consciously. And when we begin to live more consciously, we begin to tap into our true potential. So what are some examples of sanctuaries besides the home? Here are a few. These are places or ideas that will help restore our soul. I'm going to begin with just the general idea, which is simply anything that unburdens your mind. It frees it up. It allows it to travel wherever it wants. It allows the creativity to spark and bounce off each other. It's anything, any place where you can just be yourself without editing, without thinking about anything else. And it allows you to be free. So it could simply be a quiet backyard with yard chairs and lush landscape or natural foliage and enjoying that soft breeze that kind of lulls you into a state of relaxation, or maybe even a nap. It could be a bubble bath at the end of the day. It could be your time when you meditate, that sanctuary of your mind. We should all have mastered our mind, and so therefore it should be a safe place. Or it could be a cozy bakery or a coffee shop that offers a table to yourself. It's where you can sip, read, write, relax, and just get lost in your thoughts. Or it could be your regular workout time, whether when you're walking, if you walk by yourself, or when you're running, your yoga time, when you're biking or kayaking or paddleboarding. These are just a few examples, but any time where your mind is unburdened. Returning to this analogy of Hosmer Lake that I mentioned at the top of today's episode, because the lake has been allowed to exist with as little human disturbance as possible, it has flourished into a rare destination that allows us to see nature in its most pristine form, because it has been allowed to be what it truly can be. We too need to protect ourselves in this way as often as possible. Now, will we be able to be completely free from nagging commercials and uncomfortable situations and people forever? No, we won't. But the more we're conscious of not being around those instances or editing those instances out of our lives, the better. We can begin to limit these disturbances in our lives and thus begin to become clear about who we truly are, what our heart is longing for, and perhaps see and feel authentically without being influenced as much by the world and people around us. Because when we step into our full potential, not only will our lives improve, but the community and the world around us as well. I hope you've enjoyed today's episode. I know it was a little different than most of our episodes, but hopefully it'll give you food for thought. And perhaps as you go about the week, be thinking, where are my sanctuaries? Maybe I have more than I realize. And you probably do. If you would like today's show notes, go to the blog, thesimplyluxuriouslife.com/podcast46. Now, let's get to this week's Petit Pleasure. I'll see you in just a second. Beginning Saturday morning, this coming Saturday morning, July 25th, tune in for the second weekly episode of the Simple Sophisticate. I've been promising it for a long time. You guys have been asking for it and being so patient waiting for it. Thank you so much. And it will begin this Saturday. It will be called the Au Courant Weekly. In French, au courant means literally to be in the current. And Webster's dictionary defines it to mean, quote, knowing about the newest information, trends, etc., and or being stylish or current. So I thought, well, this is perfect because I've always wanted to have a regular episode or a regular post that kind of just loops us in, kind of like the daily skim if you receive that, but instead of daily, this is going to be weekly. Part of living well, after all, is being in the know, whether it is being knowledgeable of news from around the world or informed of going-ons right in your own backyard. Because it's not what you think, it's that you think. Each Saturday, tune in to the Simple Sophisticate, where I'll bring you the facts from the week in the world and national news, politics, arts, science, style, and wrap up with something extra special for you fellow Francophiles. Oh, and for you fellow Bendites, I'll have something for you too. All of the information will enable you to go forth into the weekend ready for an engaging conversation or simply mindful of the most recent current events, from which you can formulate your own opinions. So join me each Saturday morning, bright and early, and in 15 minutes or less, you will be au courant. I hope you've enjoyed this week's Petit Plaisir. I cannot tell you how excited I am for this new episode, this second weekly episode of the Simple Sophisticate. The background music, as you may have noticed, is a little different than what we're used to here on the Monday episode. So you will be hearing that particular soundtrack on Saturday mornings. It's fresh, it's lively, and hopefully it'll wake you up and get you going today and keep you in that right mind that you want to start the weekend with. If you would like to stop by today's episode of the show notes, podcast 46, you can have a glimpse of the stories that had I had this episode this last Saturday morning, the Au Courant Weekly, these are the stories that I would have covered in all different topics in all those different areas that I was mentioning. From Serena Williams winning the Wimbledon to all the way to Pluto and what they discovered on it. And even, of course, the world news of Iran and the United States, in Greece, all the way back to the Emmy Awards being announced. And of course, Harper Lee's book, Go Set a Watchman, being released on Tuesday. All of those stories and so much more will be talked about, but it will be in less than 15 minutes. So you can listen with a cup of tea in the morning, or as you're putting your shoes on, or maybe as you're laying in bed thinking about what you want to do for the weekend. It won't take long. It'll get you up to date, and I hope you enjoy it. I would love your feedback once you tune in. Well, that wraps up this episode of the Simple Sophisticate. Perhaps I'll see you back here this coming Saturday. Either way, I hope you have a wonderful week. Thank you for tuning in to the Simple Sophisticate podcast, where intelligent living is paired with signature style. For more ideas and inspiration throughout the week, stop by the blog, thesimplyluxuriouslife.com, or pick up the book, Choosing the Simply Luxurious Life, A Modern Woman's Guide. Until next Monday, I'm your host, Shannon Ables. Bonjour!